Hi, today I'm here to talk to you about standardized testing. If you've been following along, we actually recently did a series of social media posts about the differences in the SAT and the ACT and pointed out some of the changes that are coming or have come to those two tests. But today's topic is more in response to a lot of questions I've been getting lately when I'm meeting with my families. Students and parents alike are asking, what's going on with standardized testing? And at first I'm always like, I don't know, we've got test optional stuff still out there. But the more I thought about it before I decided to pop in to answer the question today, I really do understand why there is so much confusion. There are so many terms floating around out there in the ether right now about testing. Test optional, test flexible, test neutral. I just made that one up. Test preferred. These are all different things that different schools are saying is their testing policy. So I understand why, even just from a definition standpoint, it can be confusing. And also, if you've been following along, you know that in this process, so much is not standardized from one institution to the next. So colleges have the right and the ability to have different policies, and that can be really confusing to students who are trying to understand what they should be doing for this process. So let me start with a quick just recap. If you are relatively new to following this kind of information, test optional, first and foremost, is a policy by which colleges say you do not have to submit an SAT or an ACT in order for us to make an admission decision on your behalf. And what happened is there were colleges around the country who are following this plan. Many small liberal arts colleges in various parts of the country have been doing this for years and years. And along came COVID, and a lot of students couldn't actually take the test anymore. So most colleges and universities were really forced to become test optional during that time. And in the 5 years since, we're starting to see some shifts back towards tests being required, or this other smattering of different types of policies that are now being incorporated into the admissions landscape. So I understand why it is difficult for individuals who don't live in this space all the time to really keep up with what's happening out there. So let me break it down for you. Let me first say, test optional policies still remain in effect at a wide variety of schools. And I am often telling my students and their parents, if testing is not your thing, there are still going to be lots of places where you can apply without a test score. However, as I mentioned, the pendulum has shifted back a little bit to more schools sort of now requiring tests again. So big headlines have been, especially around the Ivy Leagues and some highly selective schools, going back to requiring testing. Let me also just clarify, not every Ivy League, it's not a lump sum of the Ivy League, but Cornell, Harvard, Cornell, not Penn. Penn is still test optional. Cornell, Dartmouth, Harvard, and I think Yale, sorry, I should have figured that out before I popped in here, are requiring scores again. MIT, Stanford, they're requiring scores again. So highly selectives, several of them moving back to that platform of requiring test scores. Some states have gone back to requiring test scores, not all of them just this year, but Georgia, the state system in Georgia, Tennessee, Florida actually never went test optional, so they're requiring test scores. So again, when you're looking at how this impacts college admissions, it can be really confusing because it is not just standardized like so many things in this process. There are lists available, and you can Google a list and ask which schools are and are not test optional when it comes to making a decision about submitting test scores or not. And that's a simplified response, because the other thing that comes into play, students are now grappling with the idea, or the question, I should say, of whether or not to submit scores to a test optional school. For example, is their score going to help them in the process of being admitted? And that is a very granular question that takes some time and energy to try to figure out based on the middle 50%, which is the middle 50% of the students who are admitted. What is their test score in that middle 50% range? And as a test taker, are you above that range? Are you in that range? Or are you below that range? That's one real baseline way to determine if the score will help or hurt in the process. But this is a question now I am literally evaluating with my students before they submit applications. We go through their schools one by one to decide if they are submitting scores or not, depending on the testing policy and what their scores are. There are also test flexible policies emerging, and some of these have been in existence, but whereby students can submit AP or IB scores. Those may be helpful for them in a process if their ACT or SAT scores are not as strong. And these might be scores that would boost their application overall in the process. There are also test preferred schools. Auburn University is one of those. While they are technically test optional, they are very clear that they would prefer a student to submit test scores. So what do you think that does to most students' level of anxiety? Well, they suddenly feel like this is not actually test optional. And it's not. It is test preferred. And I do appreciate that Auburn says that actually on their website. Another caveat about Auburn in particular is you must have a 3.6 GPA in order to apply test optional. So that's just one example of other sort of details that students have to be sure they understand when they're submitting applications, to be sure they know what the parameters are around any level of testing and the testing policy at various schools. Just a couple of other quick tidbits. NC State. I work with a lot of students in the state of North Carolina, so I have a lot of applicants to NC State every year. And they have a policy whereby test scores will not hurt you. Say I'm a student who submits test scores and it turns out they're not actually quite as high in the range where it will make a positive difference. NC State simply says, we're just not going to consider those. It's like they never even saw them in the process. So it feels a little more generous in terms of, hey, we're just trying to do the best we can for you. And if your scores aren't going to help, then we're not going to take them into consideration in this process for you. There are schools out there that are doing things, some of which they tell you about up front and some do not, but they are super duper scoring there for students. And what that means is a student could submit an SAT score and an ACT score, and the college is going to look at what are the best sub scores overall and give an overall best composite. So for example, if a student took the ACT and did really, really well in the math section, but maybe on the SAT did not do as well in the math section, with a super duper score, even though they're different types of tests, it could overall help the student because they are looking at where did they find the best sub score in terms of that. So lots of variations out there in the world with standardized testing, and it can be confusing and difficult to keep up with all of those details, certainly. And I just hate that all of the different options, while they are meant to alleviate stress, really sort of feel like they are adding stress to families and students in particular who are trying to determine what's the best path forward in terms of testing. So my conclusion is you've got to ask a lot of questions. You've got to get real specific about what each school is requiring of you. And quite frankly, then you have to make some judgment calls in some cases about whether or not you should submit or not. So as always, if you have questions about this or any other part of the process, me and my team are here to help, and we would love to hear from you. You can drop a comment, send us an email, come to our website and fill out the inquiry form.